Current time, 11:42 p.m. Location, 402. Maple Drive, Oak Creek Meadows. If you have never seen a police officer try to write a citation while squinting against the light of 1,000 dying suns emanating from suburban pavement, you haven't lived. Officer Miller looked tired. That was my first observation. He looked like a man who had signed up for the force to catch bank robbers, or perhaps rescue cats from trees, but instead found himself standing in my front yard at nearly midnight, bathed in a hue of blue so intense it felt like we were inside a nuclear reactor's cooling pool. The red and blue strobe lights of his cruiser were flashing behind him, but they were pathetic, washed-out little flickers compared to the ground beneath our feet. My driveway wasn't just glowing. It was singing in the visual spectrum. It was a solid slab of Cherenkov radiation blue. It was the color of a sci-fi movie portal just before the aliens invade. It was illuminating the underside of the oak tree. It was casting eerie, long shadows up the beige vinyl siding of Mrs. Higgins' house across the street. I stood there in my bathrobe, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee I didn't really want, just to have something to do with my hands. I felt like a wizard who had cast a spell he couldn't turn off. Miller adjusted his cap, trying to block the glare from below. He looked at his notepad, then down at the ground, then squinted at me. "Sir," he began, his voice heavy with the exhaustion of a man who was just about to clock out before dispatch ruined his night. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me." "Shoot," I said. My teeth looked incredibly white in this light. I probably looked like a floating head in a bathrobe. "Is this—" Miller gestured vaguely at the concrete beneath his boots. "Is this radioactive? Should I be calling hazmat?" I took a sip of the coffee. "No, officer. It is not radioactive. It is compliant." Miller blinked. "Compliant? HOA bylaws," I said, pointing a finger at the glowing abyss that used to be a hairline crack in my pavement. "Section 402B required me to fill the cracks and seal the driveway for a uniform appearance. I have done so." Miller looked down again. He lifted his boot, half expecting the sole to be melting. It wasn't. The resin was cool to the touch, hard as a rock, and emitting enough lumens to guide a Boeing 747 to a safe landing in dense fog. "I got a call," Miller said, flipping his notebook page. Dispatch said the caller reported, and I quote, "A UFO has crashed and is leaking plasma into the storm drain." Another caller, a Mrs. Brenda Stoley, she reported light assault. "Light assault," I repeated. "That sounds like Brenda." "She says she can't sleep," Miller continued. He looked over his shoulder at the house across the street. Mrs. Higgins was standing in her window, staring. Her cat was on the windowsill, batting frantically at a moth that was clearly confused by the fact that the sun had apparently risen from the underworld. "Mrs. Higgins over there looks entranced." "It's just resin, Miller. High-grade, industrial, photoluminescent resin. Rare earth illuminate pigment. It charges in the sun all day. And then," I spread my hands like I was presenting a new car, "gives back at night. It's bright," Miller deadpanned. "It is efficient," I countered. "Think of the energy savings on street lamps. I'm doing the city a favor. I'm a patriot, really." The radio on Miller's shoulder crackled. "Unit 4 Alpha, what's the status on the, glowing object?" Miller pressed the button on his radio, staring dead at me. "Dispatch, be advised. The object is a driveway. Repeat, the object is a driveway." "Copy that, 4 Alpha. Driveway?" "Affirmative. Suspect claims it is—" "Art? Compliance," I corrected him softly. "Malicious compliance." Miller sighed, a long rattling sound that seemed to vibrate in his chest. He finally holstered his pen. "Look, buddy, I don't have a code for driveway too bright. I have noise ordinances. I have burning ordinances. I have parking violations. I don't have a lumens per square inch limit in my handbook." "Exactly," I said, a grin spreading across my face that I knew made me look maniacal in the underlighting. "There is no law against a driveway being visible." "Visible?" Miller scoffed. "Sir, the ISS probably thinks we're signaling for extraction. I can read my ticket book without my flashlight. My partner is wearing sunglasses in the car." He gestured to the cruiser. Sure enough, inside the vehicle, his partner was slumped in the passenger seat, wearing aviators and looking thoroughly done with everything. "Is Brenda pressing charges?" I asked, looking up the street toward the imposing, overly manicured lawn of the HOA president. Her house was dark, but I knew she was there. Watching. Seething. The blue glow of my driveway reached all the way to her porch, casting a ghostly pallor over her prize-winning hydrangeas. "She wants me to arrest you for disturbing the peace," Miller said. "But unless this concrete starts singing death metal, the peace is technically undisturbed. It's just illuminated." He turned to walk back to his car, then stopped. He looked down at the intricate web of glowing veins I had created, the way the resin filled every tiny imperfection, every fissure, creating a map of light that looked like a lightning storm frozen in stone. "It looks like the grid from Tron," Miller muttered. "That was the inspiration," I admitted. He shook his head, fighting a small smile. "If I get a call that planes are trying to land on Maple Drive, I'm coming back with a jackhammer." "Understood, officer." As he drove away, the red and blue strobe faded, leaving me alone in the silence of the night, standing in the center of my own personal galaxy. I looked at the house across the street. I looked at Brenda's house. 2 weeks. It had only taken 2 weeks to get from a simple piece of paper to a neighborhood incident. I took a sip of coffee. It was cold now. But revenge? Revenge was just heating up. Time, 4:30 p.m. The day the war began. The suburbs are designed to kill you slowly. They don't use bullets or poison. They use boredom and beige paint swatches. They use the slow, crushing weight of uniformity. I was coming home from a day that could only be described as long. I work in supply chain logistics, which is a fancy way of saying I send emails to people asking where the stuff is, and they reply telling me the stuff is on a boat, and then I tell the client the stuff is on a boat, and everyone is unhappy about the boat. I pulled into my driveway, my perfectly functional, structurally sound concrete driveway, and did the ritualistic checking of the mail. Bills. Junk. Credit card offer. More junk. And then I saw it. The envelope. You know the one. It wasn't standard white office paper. It was cream. It was heavy cardstock. It had the texture of money and judgment. In the top left corner, embossed in a font that screamed, "We have a legal team and too much free time," were the words, "Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association." My stomach did a little flip. I hadn't thrown a loud party since 2014. I cut my grass on Thursdays. My trash cans were always behind the screen by 6:15 p.m. What could they possibly want? I ripped it open right there in the driveway, the engine of my sedan still ticking as it cooled down. Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that your property is currently in violation of community standards, violation 402B, Unsightly discoloration of driveway pavement. Evidence of oil stains and unsealed structural cracks detract from the neighborhood aesthetic and negatively impact property values. Remediation required. Clean all stains and fill/seal all cracks to ensure a uniform appearance consistent with the neighborhood character. Deadline: 14 days. Sincerely, Brenda Stoley, HOA President. Unsightly discoloration? I said aloud to no one. I looked down. I was standing on the driveway. I looked left, I looked right. It looked like concrete. It was gray. It was hard. It kept my car from sinking into the mud. That is the job description of a driveway. I got down on my hands and knees, squinting. There, near the left tire track, was a spot. A single drop of oil. It was maybe the size of a quarter. It wasn't even black. It was a faded, translucent brown, the ghost of an oil change past. And the cracks? I crawled forward. There were a few hairline fractures, the kind of cracks that happen because the earth spins and settles and breathes. They weren't potholes, they were wrinkles. My driveway was aging gracefully. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered. "Problem, Jack?" The voice came from the sidewalk. It was a voice that sounded like styrofoam rubbing against glass. I looked up. Brenda. She was standing there, leash in hand, at us. The end of the leash was a standard poodle named Princess that looked like it had been groomed by a geometrically obsessed sculptor. Brenda wore a visor. She always wore a visor. I suspect she slept in it. She had a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. "Brenda," I said, standing up and brushing the grit off my knees. "Just the person I wanted to see. I got your love letter." I waved the cream cardstock. Brenda offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that said, "I know what is best for you, you chaotic slob." "It's nothing personal, Jack," she said, adjusting her visor. "We're just doing a sweep. Spring cleaning. We want Oak Creek Meadows to be the premier community in the district." "Brenda, it's a spot of oil the size of a coin," I said, pointing. "And these cracks? You need a microscope to see them." "It starts with a spot, Jack," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if discussing a drug ring. "Then it's a puddle. Then it's weeds. Then it's broken down cars on cinder blocks. It's the broken window theory. We have to nip it in the bud." "My car is not on cinder blocks. It's a 2019 Honda." "It just looks tired," Brenda sighed, looking at my driveway with genuine pity. "The gray is so uneven. We want the neighborhood to look awake, vibrant, uniform." "It's concrete, Brenda. It doesn't sleep. It's a rock mixture. It has no circadian rhythm." Princess the poodle yapped. Brenda silenced the dog with a sharp tug on the leash. "Just fill the cracks and seal it, Jack. Make it look new. That's all the bylaws say. Uniform appearance. You have 14 days before the fines start accruing, and you know the daily rate." I did know the daily rate. It was $50 a day. $50 a day for a crack in the ground. 14 days, I said, forcing a smile. To make it look awake. "Exactly," Brenda beamed, thinking she had won. She tapped her clipboard with her pen. "Professional application only, please. No DIY patch jobs. We want it done right." She turned to leave, her poodle prancing in lockstep. She paused after a few steps and looked back. "Oh, and Jack? Try to get that oil stain out. It really catches the eye." I watched her walk away, patrolling the street like a general inspecting the troops. I looked down at my tired, sleepy, gray driveway. I felt a heat rising in my chest. It wasn't just annoyance. It was the primal rage of a man who just wanted to drink a beer and watch Netflix, but was now being tasked with cosmetic surgery for pavement. Uniform appearance, I whispered. Professional application. I walked into my house, threw the keys on the counter, and went straight to the fridge. I grabbed a cold one, cracked it open, and took a long pull. Then, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out the thick, dust-covered binder that every homeowner receives at closing and immediately ignores. The Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CCNRs, of Oak Creek Meadows. I slammed the binder onto the kitchen table. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sun. "All right, Brenda," I said to the empty room. "You want to play by the book? Let's read the book." I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just looking for a loophole. I was looking for a weapon. And in the fine print of Section 8, Paragraph C, I was about to find a nuclear warhead. Time, 5:15 p.m. The war room, my kitchen table. There is no literature in the world more soul-crushing than homeowners association bylaws. They make tax code look like a gripping thriller. They are written by people who believe that the wrong shade of beige is a moral failing. I sat at my kitchen table, a second beer sweating onto the laminate, staring at the Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It was a 3-ring binder, thick enough to stop a small-caliber bullet. It smelled like old toner and despair. "Okay, you bureaucratic vampires," I muttered, flipping past Section 4. Acceptable flagpole dimensions and Section 6. The prohibition of above-ground pools. Let's see what you actually wrote. I found the section Brenda had cited. Violation 402B. It was vague. It was irritatingly vague. It spoke of aesthetic harmony and community standards, which are just fancy words for whatever Brenda feels like enforcing on a Tuesday. But I wasn't looking for the violation. I was looking for the remedy. I turned to Section 8. Driveway maintenance and repair. I read it once. I frowned. I took a sip of beer. I read it again. Paragraph C. Repair materials and methods. All driveway cracks exceeding 1/8 of an inch in width must be filled with a durable, weather-resistant sealant to prevent further erosion. The surface of the repair must be smooth and uniform with the surrounding grade. No specific color palette is mandated for sealant materials, provided the sealant is applied professionally and maintains structural integrity. I froze. I reread the sentence. I traced the words with my finger. No. Specific. Color. Palette. Is. Mandated. I sat back in my chair. Surely I was misreading this. Surely somewhere in the subsections there was a clause that said, "Also, please don't make it neon pink." I scoured the page. I read the footnotes. I read the appendix. There was a rule about not painting your entire driveway a non-earth tone. There was a rule about not using loose gravel. There was a rule about oil stains. But for the sealant? For the stuff you pour into the cracks? Nothing. Brenda had assumed that sealant implied black tar or gray caulk. She assumed that physics and capitalism limited the options to boring, invisible colors. She assumed I was a rational actor who wanted to blend in. Brenda assumed wrong. I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't search for driveway repair kit. That was for amateurs. That was for people who wanted to surrender. I searched for brightest industrial resin available to civilians. The internet, in its infinite and terrifying wisdom, provided. I bypassed Home Depot. I bypassed Lowe's. I ended up on a supplier website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1998. The kind of site that sells chemicals in 50-gallon drums to guys named Sarge. The product was called Lumacrete Epoxycore. It wasn't paint. It was a high-strength binding agent infused with strontium aluminate crystals. The description read, "Industrial safety grade, used for emergency runway markings, deep-sea rig identification, and hazard zones in nuclear facilities. Charges in 15 minutes of sunlight. Glow duration, 12+ hours. Brightness rating, extreme. It came in 3 colors: hazard green, warning orange, and Cherenkov blue." I clicked on Cherenkov blue. A sample image popped up. It showed a concrete floor in a pitch-black warehouse. A single line of this stuff was glowing so brightly it cast shadows on the ceiling. "Charges in sunlight," I whispered. "Glows for 12 hours. It was perfect. It was durable. It was weather-resistant. It was professional grade. It met every single letter of the law in Section 8, Paragraph C. It just happened to also be visible from low Earth orbit. I looked at the price. It was expensive. Shockingly expensive. It cost about 4 times as much as regular crack filler. I thought about Brenda's smug smile. I thought about her poodle. I thought about the word uniformity. I clicked Add to Cart. "Brenda," I said to the empty kitchen, hitting the checkout button with the force of a gavel strike. "You wanted the neighborhood to look awake? I'm about to give this entire zip code insomnia." Time: 3 days later. The search for an accomplice. Buying the nuclear-grade glow juice was the easy part. The hard part was the professionally applied clause. I couldn't just go out there with a putty knife and do it myself. If Brenda saw me crouched in the driveway, she'd void the whole operation on a technicality. I needed a receipt. I needed a contractor. I needed a professional. Unfortunately, most professionals are sane. "You want to put what in your driveway?" This was the 3rd contractor I had called. His name was Bob, from Bob's Paving. Bob sounded like a man who ate steak for breakfast and didn't have time for whimsy. It's a resin," I explained, clutching the phone. "I already bought the material. I just need you to prep the cracks and pour it. I'll pay for labor." "Listen, buddy," Bob grunted. "I pour concrete. I seal asphalt. I don't pour whatever that is. If it ain't gray or black, I don't touch it. Call a painter." "It's structural," I argued. "It's an epoxy binder." Click. I tried elegant exteriors. They hung up when I used the word glow in the dark. I tried precision pavement. They quoted me $5,000 because they thought I was asking for a heated driveway, and when I corrected them, they accused me of making a prank call for a YouTube channel. I was losing hope. The buckets of resin were scheduled to arrive in 2 days. My 14-day deadline was ticking down. I turned to the last refuge of the desperate, Craigslist. I scrolled past the sketchy ads for free dirt and lightly used mattresses. I found a post in the skilled trade section. The title was simply, "Concrete Carl. I fix rocks." The description was brief. I fix driveways. I pour slabs. No job too weird. Cash preferred. Don't ask about the 2008 incident. I called the number. "Yeah?" The voice on the other end sounded like gravel tumbling in a dryer. "Is this Carl?" "Carl's in, let's say, unavailable right now," the voice said. "State-mandated vacation. This is Rick. I'm covering his route." "Rick," I said, "do you know how to work with epoxy resin?" "Do I know resin?" Rick laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Buddy, I used to build surfboards in Baja. Then I worked in a fiberglass hull shop. Then I did other chemistry. Yeah, I know resin." "I have a job," I said. "It involves a driveway. and it involves making the HOA very, very angry. There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. Then Rick spoke, his voice dropping an octave. I hate HOAs. When do we start? The meeting. 2 days later, 6 p.m. Rick arrived in a van that defied the laws of vehicular safety. It was a Ford Econoline from the mid-90s, painted a color that was supposed to be white, but was mostly rust and Bondo. The side panel said Carl's Concrete in spray paint, but Carl had been crossed out with duct tape, and Rick was written over it in Sharpie. Rick stepped out. He was a wire-thin man with hair that looked like he had stuck a fork in an outlet. He wore cargo shorts that were more pocket than fabric, a tie-dye shirt that said, NASA, we have a problem, and safety goggles around his neck like a necklace. He smelled of acetone and chaos. You Jack? He asked, squinting at my house. I'm Jack. Nice place, Rick said, spitting on the lawn. Too beige, needs pizzazz. That's what I'm hoping for, I said. Follow me. I led him into the garage where the delivery had arrived. 4 heavy industrial buckets labeled Lumacrete, professional use only. Rick's eyes widened. He walked over to the buckets like they were filled with gold bullion. He pried the lid off one. The substance inside was a thick, milky paste with suspended crystals. Whoa, Rick whispered. Is this the strontium mix? The V10 grade? You know it? Know it? I've dreamed about it, Rick said, dipping a finger in, which I'm pretty sure was unsafe, and rubbing it against his thumb. This stuff is legit. You put this on a runway, you can land a plane without radar. What are we doing? Painting a mural? No, I said. We are filling the cracks. I walked him out to the driveway. I pointed at the hairline fractures. The HOA wants every crack filled. They want a uniform surface. They want it sealed. Rick looked at the cracks. He looked at the bucket. He looked at me. You want to vein this entire driveway with high-output glow resin? Rick asked. Like kintsugi? The Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold? But with photons? Exactly, I said. Can you do it? Rick knelt down. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and scratched at a crack. The cracks are too tight. If we just pour it on top, it'll peel. To do this right, to make it permanent, I gotta open 'em up, grind 'em out, make channels. He looked up at me, a wild grin spreading across his face. It was the face of an artist who had finally found his medium. I can widen these fissures, create a network. It won't just be lines, Jack. It'll be a circulatory system. It'll look like the earth is cracking open and the core is bleeding through. Will it be smooth? I asked. The bylaws say smooth. Smooth as glass, Rick promised. I'll sand it flush. By day, invisible. By night, Chernobyl. How much? 500 for the labor, Rick said. And you let me take pictures from my portfolio. I'm trying to rebrand. Rick's Radical Resins. Deal, I said, shaking his hand. His hand was rough and covered in dried glue. One thing, Rick said, looking around at the neighbors' houses. We gotta do the prep work during the day, but the pour... We should do the pour late afternoon. I need the ambient UV to cure the top layer, but I want to see it light up as I work, for quality control. Sure, I said. Quality control. Also, Rick added, if a lady with a clipboard comes by, I don't speak English. Or I speak only Latin. I haven't decided yet. That's Brenda. Just tell her it's a polymer blend for weatherproofing. Rick nodded, tapping the side of his head. Polymer blend. Got it. She won't know what hit her until the sun goes down. He walked back to his van, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously like the theme from The X-Files. I watched him go. I had hired a lunatic. I had spent a small fortune on radioactive-looking goop. I was about to deface my own property in a way that would likely make me a pariah in the community. I had never been happier. Time, 10:03 a.m. The next day. Decibel. Level. Jet engine takeoff. If you want to attract the attention of an HOA president, simply make a noise louder than a leaf blower. If you want to summon her instantly, like a demon drawn to a pentagram, use a pressure washer that sounds like it's powered by scream energy. Rick arrived at 9:55 a.m. He didn't knock. I knew he was there because I heard a metallic clatter, followed by a string of profanities, followed by the distinct sound of a heavy machine being dragged across asphalt. I walked out to find Rick setting up a pressure washer that looked like it had seen combat. It was covered in grease, stickers from surf shops, and one ominous warning label that just said, "Do not." "Morning, boss," Rick yelled. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones, so he was shouting at a volume usually reserved for stock trading floors. "Gotta clean the canvas, get the grime out of the pores." "Go for it," I yelled back. Rick pulled the cord. The machine sputtered, coughed a cloud of black smoke, and then roared to life. It was deafening. It wasn't a hum. It was a mechanical scream. Rick grinned, aimed the wand at my driveway, and pulled the trigger. A jet of water blasted the concrete with enough force to cut a diamond. Dirt, oil, and years of suburban sadness were instantly vaporized. Rick worked with the focus of a surgeon, blasting every crack, every crevice, ensuring the surface was sterile. And then, inevitably, she appeared. I saw the visor first, bobbing over the hedge, then the clipboard, then Brenda. She didn't look angry. She looked smug. She walked up the sidewalk, Princess the poodle trembling at the noise. I tapped Rick on the shoulder. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was ringing and heavy. "Making progress, I see," Brenda shouted, her voice still calibrated for the noise that was no longer there. She lowered her volume. "I'm glad to see you taking this seriously, Jack." She stepped onto the wet driveway, her sneakers squeaking. She looked at Rick. Rick, to his credit, looked completely unhinged. He was covered in wet grit, his tie-dye shirt soaked, his safety goggles slightly askew. "Brenda, this is my contractor," I said. "Rick." Brenda eyed Rick up and down. "Is he licensed?" "Fully," Rick lied smoothly. His voice was calm, professional, completely at odds with his appearance. "Specialized in polymer remediation and aesthetic substrate bonding. We're doing a deep cleanse before the application." Brenda nodded, impressed by the big words. She peered at the buckets stacked by the garage door. "And the material?" she asked, stepping closer. "I hope it's a neutral tone. We don't want any stark contrasts." My heart stopped. The buckets were turned away, but if she walked around them, she would see the label. Lumacrete, Extreme Glow, Cherenkov Blue. Rick moved. He didn't run, he flowed. He intercepted her path, grabbing a dirty rag from his back pocket and casually draping it over the top of the nearest bucket, obscuring the words Extreme Glow. "It's a proprietary blend, ma'am," Rick said, leaning against the bucket casually. "Imported. It's designed to mimic the natural silica of the aggregate. Very high-end, very subtle. It's actually transparent until it cures." "Transparent?" Brenda frowned. "The bylaws say uniform appearance." "It adopts the soul of the concrete," Rick said. He said it with such conviction that I almost believed him. It bonds at a molecular level to create a seamless visual continuity. You won't even know it's there until you look closely. Or until the sun goes down, I thought. Brenda smiled. She actually smiled. Well, that sounds lovely. Seamless visual continuity. I might put that in the next newsletter. Carry on, gentlemen. She turned and walked away, scribbling something on her clipboard. Probably a note about how her leadership had inspired this beautification project. Rick waited until she was inside her house. Then he exhaled, wiped sweat from his forehead, and looked at me. "Adopts the soul of the concrete?" I asked. "I improvised," Rick said. "Now help me move these buckets." She's got eyes in the back of that visor. Time: 4:45 p.m. The point of no return. The afternoon sun was starting to dip, casting long golden shadows across Oak Creek meadows. The neighborhood was quiet. People were coming home from work. Rick was essentially performing open-heart surgery on my driveway. He hadn't just cleaned the cracks. He had widened them. He used an angle grinder with a diamond blade to carve out the fissures, turning hairline fractures into distinct, deliberate channels. He connected them, creating a web that spanned the entire 20-foot length of the driveway. "Structural integrity," Rick had said, when I asked why my driveway looked like a road map. "More surface area for the bond, also more glow." "It looks like a vein system," I observed. "It's a circulatory system," Rick corrected. "Okay, time to mix." He opened the buckets. The smell hit us first. It wasn't a bad smell, exactly. It smelled like a swimming pool full of glue and electricity. It smelled like a chemistry lab. The resin was thick, viscous, and milky white. It looked harmless. It looked like Elmer's glue. Rick poured the hardener in. He attached a mixing paddle to a heavy-duty drill and submerged it. Whirr! He mixed for exactly 3 minutes, timing it on a waterproof watch. Then, he handed me a pair of gloves. "Don't get this on your skin," Rick warned. "It won't hurt you, but your hands will glow for 3 days, and it makes it hard to sleep." He poured the mixture into a specialized applicator bottle. Basically a giant squeeze bottle with a precision tip. "Here we go," Rick whispered. He started at the top, near the garage door. He squeezed the bottle, filling the channel perfectly. The resin flowed like liquid silk, self-leveling, filling the void. I watched, mesmerized. As the resin hit the concrete, it looked grayish white. It blended in reasonably well with the light gray of the aged pavement. "It looks normal," I said, almost disappointed. "Wait," Rick said, not looking up. "Let it drink the sun." He worked fast. The pot life of the resin was only 40 minutes. He moved down the driveway, tracing the lightning bolt patterns he had carved. He was sweating. I was sweating just watching him. Neighbors drove by. They slowed down, looking. They saw a guy in a tie-dye shirt pouring white goop into cracks. They lost interest. To them, it was just maintenance. Rick finished the last crack near the sidewalk just as the sun touched the tree line. He stood up, his back cracking audibly. He grabbed a bag of fine sand and dusted the top of the wet resin. "Why the sand?" I asked. "Texture," Rick said. "Bylaws say uniform texture. This knocks down the gloss, makes it matte, makes it invisible." He was right. As the sand settled and the resin began to cure, the white color faded into a dull, neutral gray. Standing 5 feet away, you could barely tell anything had been done. It just looked like a repaired driveway. It looked boring. It looked compliant. Rick packed up his tools. He threw the empty buckets into the back of his van. He wiped his hands on his shorts. It's done, Rick said. It needs 2 hours to cure hard, but it's already charging. I looked at the driveway. It looked innocent. It was a sleeper agent waiting for the activation code. I handed Rick an envelope with $500 cash. Rick counted it, nodded, and then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a pair of cheap plastic sunglasses, the kind you get at a gas station. Here, he said, handing them to me. It's getting dark, Rick. Why do I need sunglasses? Rick climbed into the driver's seat of his rust bucket van. He cranked the engine, and it backfired, sending a puff of soot into the pristine suburban air. He leaned out the window, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Trust me, boss, Rick said. When that sun goes down fully, you're going to want to protect your retinas. You just installed a landing strip for God. He peeled out, leaving tire marks on the street. Not my driveway, thankfully. I stood there, holding the sunglasses. The sun sank lower. The shadows stretched. And then, faintly, barely perceptible at first, the ground began to hum with blue light. It was starting. Time, 8:15 p.m. Visibility, improving rapidly. There is a specific kind of anxiety that comes with waiting for a prank to execute. It's the feeling of lighting a fuse and watching the spark travel slowly toward the barrel of gunpowder, wondering if you used too much powder, or if the barrel is actually a nuclear warhead. I sat on my front porch in a rocking chair, nursing a cold beer. I was wearing the cheap plastic sunglasses Rick had given me. I probably looked insane. A man in a bathrobe and dark glasses sitting in the twilight, staring intensely at his own driveway. The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned that bruised purple color that signals the end of suburbia's waking hours. Streetlights flickered on with their depressing sodium orange hum. And then, it happened. It didn't switch on like a lamp. It wasn't instant. It was organic. It was like watching a deep-sea creature wake up. At first, it was just a faint blue haze, hovering over the concrete like a low-lying mist. I took off my glasses. Is that it? I muttered. I felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe I had been scammed. Maybe Rick was just a crazy guy with Elmer's glue and a dream. But as the sky darkened further, the ground got angry. The blue deepened. It shifted from faint mist to electric neon. The veins Rick had carved, the circulatory system, began to throb with light. The strontium aluminate crystals, having gorged themselves on UV radiation all afternoon, were now vomiting photons at an alarming rate. By 8:45 p.m., it wasn't just glowing. It was projecting. The oak tree in my front yard was no longer brown and green. It was avatar blue. The underbellies of the leaves were lit up like they were on a movie set. By 9:00 p.m., true darkness had fallen, and my driveway had become a singularity. I put the sunglasses back on. I had to. The light was crisp, cold, and absolutely relentless. It didn't just illuminate my property, it colonized the neighborhood. The beige siding of Mrs. Higgins' house across the street was now a shimmering azure. I could see a raccoon rummaging in a trash can 3 houses down, clearer than if it were high noon. The raccoon looked confused. It stopped, looked at my driveway, and scurried away, presumably to find a less radioactive neighborhood. A car turned onto the street. It was a sedan doing about 25 mph. As it approached my house, it didn't just slow down, it stopped, dead in the middle of the road. The driver rolled down the window. He didn't say anything. He just leaned out, mouth slightly open, bathed in the blue glow like he was witnessing a religious event. "Is it charged?" he yelled over the silence. "It's compliant," I yelled back. He gave me a thumbs up and drove away slowly, swerving slightly as he kept looking back in his rearview mirror. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my next-door neighbor, Dave. Message: "Dude, my living room is blue. Did you open a portal?" Reply: "Just sealing the cracks, Dave. Maintenance." Message: "It's awesome. My kids think we live in Tron." I looked down at my creation. Rick hadn't lied. It was a masterpiece. It looked like the earth had cracked open to reveal a core made of pure energy. It was glorious. It was beautiful. It was the loudest thing I had ever seen, without making a sound. Time: 9:30 p.m. The gathering of the moths. Human beings are simple creatures. We see a bright light, we walk toward it. By 9:30, my sidewalk was no longer empty. It was a venue. It started with the kids. They appeared on bicycles, drawn like moths to a bug zapper. They ditched their bikes on the lawn and stood at the edge of the driveway, afraid to touch it. "Is it hot?" one kid asked. "No," I said from the porch. "It's science." One brave soul, a kid named Tyler, reached out and poked a glowing vein. "Whoa, it's cold!" That broke the dam. Suddenly, there were 6 kids dancing on my driveway. Their shadows were long and sharp, cutting through the blue haze. They looked like silhouettes in an iPod commercial. Then the adults came. Dave walked over with a beer. Mrs. Higgins came out to her porch, squinting, her cat wrapped around her ankles. A couple walking a golden retriever stopped and took a selfie. It turned into an impromptu block party. People were laughing. They were pointing. They were asking for the name of the contractor. For a brief, shining moment, the cul-de-sac was united in wonder. And then the air pressure dropped. The temperature seemed to plummet. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Brenda had arrived. She wasn't wearing her uniform visor. She was wearing a floral bathrobe that was aggressively pink and fuzzy slippers. Her hair was in curlers. She looked like a vengeful Easter egg. She didn't walk. She marched. She stormed up the sidewalk, shielding her eyes with her hand as if she were walking into a sandstorm. "Jack!" she shrieked. Her voice cut through the chatter. "Jack, what in the name of all that is holy is this?" The music of the evening stopped. The kids froze. Dave took a long sip of his beer and took a step back. "Good evening, Brenda," I said, not rising from my rocking chair. "Lovely night for it." "Turn it off," Brenda screamed. She pointed a trembling finger at the ground. "Turn it off right now." "I can't, Brenda. It's not plugged in." "What do you mean you can't?" She looked down at the glowing veins, horror washing over her face. The blue light was unflattering to her night cream. It's radioactive. It's chemical. It's an eyesore." "It's a safety feature," I corrected. "Liability reduction. Nobody is going to trip on a crack in this driveway. I'm thinking of the community, really. Imagine the lawsuits if someone twisted an ankle in the dark." "It's not dark," she yelled, gesturing to the sky. "It's midnight in July, but on your lawn, it's noon on Neptune. My bedroom is blue, Jack. I can't sleep. Princess is barking at the shadows." "Have you tried blackout curtains?" Dave suggested helpfully. Brenda spun on him. "You stay out of this, Dave." She turned back to me, her face flushed. "This is a violation. A massive violation. Unapproved exterior modification. Disturbance of the peace. Light pollution." "Actually," I said, reaching into my robe pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper, my highlighted copy of the bylaws. Violation 402B required me to fill the cracks with a durable, weather-resistant sealant. It required a uniform appearance. It did not specify color, nor did it set a limit on albedo or luminescence. I held the paper up. It glowed blue in the ambient light, making the text easy to read. I followed your instructions, Brenda. To the letter. Brenda snatched the paper from my hand. She tried to read it, but the blue light was disorienting. She threw it on the ground. I don't care about technicalities, she sputtered. It's aggressive. It's an assault on the senses. I am calling the police. Go ahead, I said. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the glowing rock formation. I will. She fumbled for her phone in her bathrobe pocket. I'm reporting a public nuisance, a hazard. Mr. Jack, Tyler, the kid from down the street, piped up. Can I lick it? Please don't, Tyler, I said, never breaking eye contact with Brenda. Brenda dialed 911. We all watched. It felt petty. It felt unnecessary. But as she pressed the phone to her ear, I took a sip of my beer and smiled. Yes, Brenda shouted into the phone. I need an officer at 402 Maple Drive immediately. My neighbor he has deployed a weapon of mass distraction. No, not destruction, distraction. It's blue. It's everywhere. Send someone now. She hung up and glared at me. They're coming. Good, I said, putting my feet up on the railing. I'll put a pot of coffee on. Looks like it's going to be a bright night.